Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our afternoon read aloud. Today, we will begin a new book. So, I love this part of teaching. I love reading the classics. We read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and we are going to start a new book. So, if you were to Google the top children's books of all time, you will find this book on every single list, and a lot of lists. This book is number one. So I'm telling you, this is one of the most famous stories. It's one of my favorite books. It's also a movie. You may have heard of it. So we are going to start Charlotte's Web. I wonder if you've heard of it. Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Yeah! Some of you have probably seen the movie. I doubt you've read the book. Before we start, I am going to tell you this book has some serious concepts in it. It talks about life and death. And it can talk about some serious stuff. But I know this class, and I know you're all ready to handle it. We will talk about it. I will talk about it. I encourage you to talk about it with your families. And remember, we talked about why do we like sad books? Why do we like sad songs sometimes? Sad movies. And we know why we like sad things. Sometimes it helps us. And we're kind of going through a sad time right now. So I think that it's okay. You'll be able to handle this book. I'm confident that you will be. And it's such a great book. But I should warn you, it does get into some serious stuff, and there's some life and death in here. And I'll talk about it because I find it interesting. Before we get started, take a look at our cover. So Charlotte's Web, and you'll see there's a spider going down. We have a pig, and we have a little girl. So there's some characters on the cover. There's some pictures that I'll try to show you up close. And the author is E.B. White, very famous author. He wrote Stuart Little. He's written other things. This is his most known book, but he's a great author. Here we go. So we're going to start Charlotte's Web. I'm going to try to do more with this book than I did with Charlie. I'm going to see. I really want some involvement, engagement. I want to try to do some activities with this book. I'm going to be posting some videos. I love the Charlotte's Web movie. I didn't really like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie, but I love Charlotte's Web. So we would have watched that in the classroom. But first, we'll read some chapters, and I have some ideas of what I can do. I'll be doing some more assignments with it instead of just me reading. So, chapter 1, it's called Before Breakfast. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8 years old. "Well," said her mother, "one of those pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything, so your father has decided to do away with it." Whoa. This started off pretty serious. The first line is, Papa's got an axe. What's Papa gonna do with that axe? He is going to slaughter one of the baby pigs. Now, my mom kind of has a farm, and if you know anything about farms, it's not all that great. Farms can be ugly because you have to deal with those animals. So Papa's gonna slaughter the pig. This started off like, whoa, what a beginning to our story. Starts much faster than Charlie did. "Do away with it?" shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it just because it's smaller than the others?" Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. "Don't yell, Fern," she said. "Your father is right. The pig would probably die anyways." Fern pushed a chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled like springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. So pay close attention to how E.B. White, the author, describes his setting. Because when you're doing your writing, I love that he said it smelled of springtime, and he really stretches out that scene. So that's just the first page. And I'm sorry, I won't stop that much when I read, but I just wanted to point out, it's getting serious. Oh, look at this picture. Okay. "Please don't kill it," she sobbed. "It's unfair." Mr. Arable stopped walking. "Fern," he said gently, "you'll have to learn to control yourself." "Control myself?" yelled Fern. "This is a matter of life and death, and you talked about controlling myself?" Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hands. "Fern," said Mr. Arable, "I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along." "But it's unfair," cried Fern. "The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me?" Mr. Arabelle smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this is different. A little girl's one thing, and a little runty pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I have ever heard of. A queer look came over John Arabelle's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said, you go back to the house and I'll bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on the bottle like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arabelle returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs, changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. Put it on her chair, said Mrs. Arabelle. Mr. Arabelle set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father, then lifted the lid of the carton. There, inside, looking up at her, was a newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. He's yours, said Mr. Arabelle, saved from an untimely death. And may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness. Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. Oh, she whispered, look at him. He's absolutely perfect. She closed the carton carefully. First, she kissed her father, then she kissed her mother. Then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment, her brother Avery came down into the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed, an air rifle in one hand and a wooden dagger in the other. What's that? He demanded. What's Fern got? She's got a guest for breakfast, said Mrs. Arabelle. Wash your hands and face, Avery. Let's see it, said Avery, setting his gun down. You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat. Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery, said his mother. The school bus will be along in half an hour. Can I have a pig too, Pop? Asked Avery. No, I only distribute pigs to early risers, said Mr. Arabelle. Fern was up at daylight trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. A small one, to be sure, but nevertheless, it's a pig. It just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Let's eat. But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arabelle found a baby's nursing bottle and a rubber nipple. She poured warm milk into the bottle. And there's Avery, the brother. So we have a few characters introduced. We have Fern. She's going to be one of our main characters. We have the pig. We have Mr. and Mrs. Arabelle. And that's the mother, Fern's mother and father. And then there's Avery. And he has a little air rifle. He's a 10-year-old boy who slept later than Fern. Fitted the nipple over the top and handed it to Fern. Give him breakfast, she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked from the road. Run, commanded Mrs. Arabelle, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out to the road and climbed onto the bus. Fern took no notice of the others in the bus. She just sat and stared out the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. Its name is Wilbur, she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania? Wilbur, replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. So Fern is feeding her baby pig with a bottle. Isn't that the cutest thing? I would love to feed a baby pig with a bottle. I don't care what you say, but I would love to feed a baby pig with a bottle. So what did Fern name the pig? Wilbur. And then she was sitting in class at the very end of our chapter, and the teacher said, what is the capital of Pennsylvania? And she said, Wilbur. That is not the capital of Pennsylvania. Bonus points if you know the capital of Pennsylvania. Philadelphia. Everyone says Philadelphia. They're wrong. The capital is Harrisburg. This was back in a time when we actually had to memorize our capitals. We don't do that as much anymore. I can tell that this takes place in the distant past. There is a school bus, But Avery actually brought his little air gun to school, and we would not allow that anymore. So I can tell that this is not present time. This is in the past. But it's not too far past because they have a school bus. Notice how I'm reading really close and paying close attention to things like that. So our story started pretty serious. The father was taking the axe to kill a pig. Fern saved that pig's life. And what did Fern name the pig? Wilbur. So, chapter 2 is called Wilbur. I will read that chapter for you tomorrow. I hope you liked this, and watch tomorrow.